Thank all of you for coming. It's not easy to pull a crowd on a Saturday night, so thanks for making the effort. This is an event I've been looking forward to. Increasingly, the Free Speech Union has been getting involved with issues involving free speech and football. I don't know how many of you have been following our recent work, but one of our most recent cases is that of a 17-year-old girl who is in a women's football club playing in a women's football league. And at a pre-season friendly, she was surprised to see that one of the players in the other quote-unquote ladies team was clearly a man, had a beard, dressed in a tracksuit. And she asked him if he was a man, and he said, "Yes, I'm transgender." And which is in some ways quite endearing because that's off script. He should have said, "No, I'm a woman." But anyway, he said, "Yes, I am a man, but I'm a transgender man." And she then asked the referee whether he should be playing because he was seemingly quite aggressive, and she was concerned about herself and her teammates. And the ref didn't know. And then the captain of the opposing team complained that she was being bigoted and intolerant, and eventually complained to Kick It Out, and Kick It Out complained to the FA, and the FA, incredibly, then sanctioned this 17-year-old girl. And the Free Speech Union got in touch with her, and we've appealed the sanction, and we hope to have an outcome soon. But I'm very pleased to say that that girl and her mother are with us in the audience tonight. So a big round of applause. It takes a lot of guts to stand up in the way they've done. She didn't plead guilty. She pleaded not guilty, which was the right plea. Well done to her. It's people standing up that changes the weather. And we've got someone else who stood up with us tonight in the form of Linzi Smith, who, in addition to being a member of the FSU, is an LGBT advocate and a lifelong supporter of Newcastle United Football Club. And she was banned, incredibly, from Newcastle for expressing her gender-critical beliefs, her belief that sex is biological, binary, and immutable on X. She didn't say anything particularly provocative in Newcastle United's ground. She didn't say it to a player or an official. She just said it on social media, but somebody complained. And, well, anyway, she'll tell you the story, but it was a horrific story. She ended up being banned for 2 seasons from the club she's been following all her life. And she cannot now go and see them home or away, incredibly. But anyway, we'll hear from Linzi in a second. Baroness Fox doesn't need much introduction. She's the director of the Academy of Ideas. She convenes the yearly Battle of Ideas Festival. She initiated the Debating Matters competition for sixth formers. And in May 2019, she was elected as an MEP for the North West constituency of the UK in the European Parliament elections. And in September of 2020, she became a member of the House of Lords as Baroness Fox of Buckley. And she's the author of 2 books on free speech. I find that offensive, and I still find that offensive. Thank you. And last but very much not least, Joey Barton, a former professional footballer who has represented England, both at the under-21 and the senior level, and was a pivotal player for Manchester City, Newcastle United. Did I get that wrong? Queen's Park Rangers, Marseille, Burnley and Glasgow Rangers, and he went on to manage Fleetwood Town and Bristol Rovers. He was a controversial player with a reputation for hard tackles, but he is equally well known for his outspokenness and the attempts made by various celebrities and the courts to silence him. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give a big welcome to our panel this evening. So, Linzi, let's start with you. Do you want to just briefly tell us your story? What happened to you?
What was it? November of 2023. It'll be now. Was it 23?
Yeah, I think so. Yep.
Yeah, because now it's 2025. November of 2023, 1st November, I was opening my emails to have a look and see when the ballot would open for the Chelsea game, because I was buzzing to get into that. And I saw it open the next day, but then above that, there was an email from the security office saying that my account had been suspended because I was under investigation. It come to her attention I was under investigation for a hate crime with Northumbria Police. At which point I was just befuddled. And I thought, hang on, this is so serious. Like, surely I would know before a football club knows about this. So I called the security office immediately. They were adamant I was. I'm not an idiot. So I decided to phone Forth Banks Police Station directly. They said I wasn't. So I ended up making a complaint of harassment, because I felt like someone was targeting me very early on. I went back to the club. They were adamant I was. And this kind of went back and forth for about a week. Before I eventually got home one day and I saw there was something posted through the slip in my house which said victim support, with PC Lyon's name on it. And I thought, this is obviously something to do with the report I've made. And it wasn't. I mean, I phoned him and he didn't even tell me what the accusation was, anything like that. I was invited in for an interview under caution. And that was pretty much it. And then I spent the next 24 hours, I didn't tell anyone. I was sick to my stomach. I was mortified, terrified. And I just thank my lucky stars that on the Thursday, I found my way to Harry Miller, who then introduced me to Toby. And this is how I find myself where I am today. So I think, I just count my lucky stars that I've found myself surrounded by the people I have, because if I hadn't, I wouldn't have even known what to do. So
What was the alleged hate crime?
I wasn't even told, to be honest. I was just told that I'd posted things on social media that could be seen as transphobic. So that was all I got.
But the police, after interviewing you, decided to take no further action. I mean, there was no case to answer, no substance to the charge.
Yeah, I went in, I gave a no comment interview, and the police phoned me not even 2 hours later and told me no further action. The club then made me wait a whole week for the outcome to the review, where they just went ahead and banned me anyway, in spite of it, because they said that it wasn't that a crime hadn't been committed, it was that they couldn't identify that it was me that had done it because I no commented my interview. So they were still adamant I'd committed a crime.
And one thing we discovered in the course of trying to appeal this and trying to reason with NUFC about banning you for 2 seasons because of stuff you'd said on social media, which the police themselves said wasn't against the law. We discovered that they'd actually asked this kind of shadowy unit within the Premier League to compile a dossier on you. And when we SAR'd them, when we did a subject access request, it came back, and there was this extraordinary kind of voluminous dossier that had been compiled by what, to all intents and purposes, was a secret intelligence agency embedded within the Premier League, which was sort of saying, where you walk your dog, where you live, where you work, what your mother sells in her shop. I mean, it was extraordinary that they surveilled you to this extent because you'd said you didn't think trans women were women on X, as though that made you, almost, a spy of a foreign nation.
Yeah, I mean, they even had a section on it that was labelled vulnerabilities, which was a section where they are going to look for vulnerable areas for them to come at me. And what all it says in that vulnerability section is basically just pages of abuse that I receive, including someone who's photoshopped my face onto a woman being hanged. Homophobic abuse, everything of the sort. And it literally says in there, she is the victim of online abuse. And it's just made no difference.
Anyway, you're fighting back. You are, with our help, suing Newcastle United for belief discrimination. We are trying to sue NUFC and the Premier League for breach of privacy. With Harry Miller, you're suing Northumbria Police,
Chief Constable Vanessa Jardine,
of Northumbria Police, and you've also you've got a case percolating away in which you are going to sue the FA over its promotion of the Rainbow Laces campaign, which you think is discriminatory against people on the LGB but not the T side of the equation.
I don't think it even just comes into that. It's more like I'm a Christian woman, and
Well done.
God bless you. Christ is King. But as a Christian woman, when you see people being made to wear these rainbow armbands, and then you have a footballer, Marc Guehi, and all he writes is Jesus loves you, which he does. He loves all of us. It doesn't matter. Jesus loves us all. And when he is then threatened with sanctions and punishment just for writing Jesus loves you on an armband, because you're not allowed to have religious or political statements, yet you have got them literally walking around with an ideological belief wrapped around their arm, and we're all just supposed to accept it. It's the sheer hypocrisy of the whole thing, you know.
Joey, let me turn to you. Why do you think it is that seemingly over the past 15 years, football clubs have become much less tolerant of dissent from this rather rigid equity, diversity and inclusion dogma? I mean, you can understand why that dogma embeds itself in the public sector, particularly the NHS, across Whitehall, at universities, even in schools. But why has it sort of got such a foothold in football? How did that happen, do you think?
How long have you got, really? I have to make a confession as well. I was actually the first player to start the Rainbow Laces campaign. But believe it or not, I was, yeah. With Paddy Power and Stonewall. Because I had an uncle who massively inspired me when I was growing up. My Uncle Tom, ironically, I've just driven past Salford Boys Club, nipping through the traffic to get here tonight. And he was very, a big personality and was gay. I didn't know until I was like 22, possibly. Never had a steady girlfriend, wouldn't present as your kind of camp growing up in the kind of council estates of Liverpool. Really good sportsman, great taste in music. So because he was honestly the coolest fella you'll ever meet, like as an uncle, and he was gay. So for me, being gay didn't matter. He was as talented a footballer as anybody, as brave as anybody, etc. And I wanted any lads who were involved in our football team or football teams to feel like, look, not what you get judged on in a football team is, can you defend, can you score goals, whatever it is, whatever your role is in the team, not who you're going to bed with tonight or how many are you going to bed with, or do you perform on a Saturday? And then to see, the way the TV's gone and the way the kind of culture went after the George Floyd kind of, COVID period. And, we've just gone and we've just dropped quality for quotas. I just think that's the wrong message to send future generations.
Part of the rationale for the Rainbow Laces campaign is that homophobia must be rampant in football. And the evidence for that is not just chance, but the fact that so few footballers have come out as gay. This is always cited as evidence that it's not a tolerant environment for gay men. But does that ring true with you? Did you know any footballers who were gay but frightened to come out because it was a homophobic environment?
Well, if you give me a kiss, I'll tell you later. No, look, it's. I think lads are aware. If you just run the numbers, 1 in 10 men or something like that, and obviously we're in a hyper masculine environment where if there's any weakness, it's exploited, and unfortunately, that's not. Nowadays that wouldn't happen on the pitch as it maybe would in yesteryear if somebody, like Justin Fashanu, for instance. And I did a documentary with Amal because nobody in football would touch this because of our Tom's impact on me. And I was like, well, if they think I'm gay, that's like the least offensive they are to me in football stadiums. Every stadium you go to, you run the gauntlet. And for me, the big concern, even I had to think about it before I spoke out, because I thought people are going to think I'm gay, and people have said really homophobic things to me about, obviously, the rainbow laces and obviously the documentary we done. But also, you know, we had to create a landscape where if somebody was gay, you know, we've seen Thomas Hitzelsperger, we've seen the lad who played in the MLS come out as gay as he was playing. So, you know, I don't think we're going to get a massive outpouring of, you know, gay men, because usually gay men don't play Premier League football. They're a rarity. But obviously, the law of numbers, there's plenty out there playing across the globe. And I thought it was important for us to, you know, raise awareness to that and also make it a little bit more acceptable. What I didn't think was going to happen was a load of fellas were going to come over the drawbridge and start winning gold medals in the Women's Olympics and playing in women's sports. I was like, can we be a bit more inclusive without losing our, pardon me French, our fucking marbles?
So Claire, jumping off from there, how did we go from wanting to be more inclusive, I mean, seemingly a benign, well-meaning campaign like the Rainbow Laces campaign when Joey first endorsed it, how did we segue from that to losing our marbles, which seems to be where we are now?
I mean, I think that football has become embroiled in a political project to police the working class in such a way that they behave like the middle class, or as the middle class would like to shape them. So it's become a kind of huge experiment in behaviour modification. And if you think about, you know, so you're a politician, your concern is that there's all these kind of like plebs out there behaving badly, and you haven't really got much of a relationship with them. And this is partly because political parties have lost their core roots, and I mean all political parties. And then they sort of think, and even the trade unions, nobody's members of them. And, you know, the institutional mechanisms through which the establishment relates to ordinary people disappear. One of the places where you can see ordinary people gathering en masse in their millions with passion every week, lots of times a week, is football, right? So it's a temptation. On the one hand, you get a situation whereby there was a kind of there was that sort of whole Blairite middle-class takeover of football. You know, everybody became a football fan. Every politician was seen, you know, it's a bit like having a pint or eating chips or something to prove your credibility. But it then was going to the football. But then it was also a kind of, oh, this is the way that we can relate to them. And then it starts to be, and then we can make examples. So the thing about what Joey did, there's loads of grassroots initiatives in football that are kind of political, right? I've been really inspired by the way that the Spurs fans, and in fact the Arsenal fans, went out of their way, actually without the endorsement of their team, of the clubs, to support Emily Damari, the British hostage. They were kind of discouraged, you know, and so you can, on the one hand, you can say, oh, I don't like it when people are taking the knee, but I actually quite like it when football fans do, you know what I mean, sort of from the heart stuff. It's when it's hijacked. It's when it's hijacked and it becomes a message to ordinary working class people. You should have these views. You should not have these views. So I've hated with a passion all of the anti-racist campaigns, and I consider myself, you know, somebody steeped in an anti-racist tradition. That's what I spent most of my, as it were, growing up political life doing, was involved in active anti-racist campaigns. And then I start seeing this institutionalised anti-racism, and I despised it. It doesn't mean I don't think there's not racism on the terraces or a bit of homophobia. It doesn't mean that I think that all fans are lovely. It doesn't mean that I think that the chants are kind. But the other thing, just the only other thing is, football is one of those places. So I run the Academy of Ideas, and we're all about trying to create a new public square, which is a bit like what this debate tonight is, you know, places where you can come together without regimentation or the establishment looking in on you. We can speak frankly. Football is one of those spaces where people organise spontaneously. Do you know what I mean? They don't need organising. They don't need being told what to do. They do it. It's a hugely important part of a local community very often, right? It's where people bond. They let off steam. They're tribal. But it's an understood language. And the idea of people coming in and saying, we can't have that, is about that policing of the public sphere. And I think once they started doing that, they just can't imagine the public sphere in anything other than their own image. And then they saw it as a useful vehicle to be able to, as I say, turn the working class into a sedate, non-threatening, woke group. The thing is, when you try and do that with football fans, it's all a bit odd. But it has, in some instances, worked a bit, especially the way the Premier League do it.
Can I ask you about the football governance bill? So, in the eyes of the Labour government, football clubs aren't nearly woke enough. They're not doing enough to promote equity, diversity, and inclusion amongst the fans within the clubs. Newcastle United, in the eyes of our present government, aren't nearly aggressive enough in their promotion of trans inclusion at St James's Park. They want them to do more. And one of the clauses in the Football Governance Bill, which I think you've tabled an amendment to try and get removed, will require all the clubs in the English Football League to do much more when it comes to the promotion of EDI, and can fine this new regulator. The football governance regulator will be able to fine clubs if they're not doing more. Tell us a bit about that. Where do you think that's come from? Do you think Labour honestly believe that football clubs aren't doing enough, that all these campaigns, taking the knee, excluding fans like Linzi for being gender critical, that's not enough? Do they really think that? Or do they not know, because they've hardly any of them have actually been to a football game, actually how woke the atmosphere in most football grounds now is?
The Football Governance Bill is a hangover from the Conservative government who introduced it, just to clarify that. And it was a stupid piece of legislation when they brought it in, and it's become even more stupid under Labour. But I don't want anyone... I think we should be equal opportunities when it comes to looking at the stupidity of governments, of any party. But the Football Governance Bill, in general, is... A lot of these things that sound like they're well-intentioned, because it's all about saying the Premier League take a too great a share of the cake. A lot of fans in lower league teams are getting absolutely screwed over. They've got billionaire or millionaire owners who just use the clubs as a cash cow. All of these things, right? And so they say we've gone out and asked the fans, and they want somebody to come in and sort it out. And it's very appealing as a headline that actually, without going into detail, because it's really boring and technical, the Football Governance Bill will destroy English football if it goes through the way it's been proposed at the moment. But now I'm going to come back to what we're talking about tonight on the free speech thing. It's a terrible over-regulation mission creep bill. The reason why I got involved in discussing it in the House of Lords is because the Labour Party came and said, we love the Tories' Football Governance Bill, but we're going to do two other things. And one of them was we're going to introduce this EDI clause. And it's not just a fine. You see, the point about this new regulator that's been given unprecedented powers is that they're going to be able to issue licenses to football clubs. So ultimately, they can withhold licenses from a football club. So if a football club does not adhere to the regulatory regime, part of which will be in more intense EDI, you could lose your license from a government regulator. I mean, it's too unbearable to think about. So the EDI point is exactly the point that you make. EDI is crawling all over, teams. But the thing is that what happens is the Premier League, in particular, exactly as Linzi's experienced, they think we'll do a bit on EDI. They're just like every other corporation, right? Every other big business. They set up an EDI department, starts off with one director, ends up with 101. You know what I mean? It starts off with a few regulations and a bit of rainbow laces. The next minute, they're kind of going through, sending everybody in the staff team, all the play, everybody on training courses, etc., and then policing the fans. They've probably got the money to waste to do that. Right. If you're a small lower league team, the whole reason you support this football governance bill, is because you think you'll be better off at the end of it. You won't be, because you're going to spend all your extra money, time, energy doing EDI stuff, because it's now a requirement that you, every year, as part of your governance report, which you have to now write for the regulator, you imagine, it's basically jobs for lawyers, jobs for consultants. There's like 3 men and a dog in some small team, and now, or women in a dog, and they've got to sit down and write down all this absolute guff, right? And it will be perilous for them to be able to keep up the payments, but they'll be scared not to do it. So it's it's bad enough that you've got it as a voluntary measure that most football managements deploy because it's become fashionable to be woke and everybody's watching their back and they think they need to do it and all the rest of it. It goes against that spirit of the fans, in my opinion. I'm particularly distraught by the fact that you have literally decolonisation and critical race theory going on in football clubs. And they basically think the problem with football is that too many of the fans are white and male. You know what I mean? You know, it can't... I mean, you know the people that they don't like? Male, white, working class people, enough to freak anyone out. And that includes the people who run football teams, sadly, right? And so they're trying to change all that. Let them get on with it. But when the government employs a hugely powerful regulator to impose that on, then Linzi, I'm afraid there will be other Linzis that we don't know about as we're speaking now. But there's lots and lots of Linzis going to be created by this. And we can already see through things like football banning orders and so on, they're already policing the speech of things that happen on the terraces, in the grounds, never mind off them as Linzi's. But there's going to be now an excuse to be even more stringent in telling people you can't say that, you can't sing that, you can't chant that. It's a very nerve-wracking moment.
And I just should add that there's another rough beast slouching towards Bethlehem in the form of the Employment Rights Bill. So the Employment Rights Bill, Clause 18, extends employer liability for the harassment of their employees from employee-on-employee harassment, which they're currently liable for, to third-party harassment of their employees. So once that bill has passed, employers will have to take all reasonable steps to protect their employees from being harassed by third parties, i.e. members of the public, customers. And harassment, as defined by the Employment Tribunal, includes overheard conversations. So if you overhear a conversation you find upsetting or offensive being engaged in by a couple of colleagues in the workplace, you can sue your employer for not doing more to protect you from having to overhear these upsetting or offensive remarks. Once this bill becomes law, that will extend to employees overhearing contentious, controversial opinions being expressed by members of the public. So what that means in football stadiums is that if a linesman rules a goal offside and the opposing fans in the stadium start shouting out, "Are you blind?" A partially sighted steward can sue the club for not doing more to protect him from having to overhear harassing comments such as that. It gets worse. Busybody members of the people at the club, fans, they can sue the club on behalf of the partially sighted steward. You don't actually have to have the protected characteristic that gives you grounds to complain. It's extraordinary. I mean, in future, the combination of the Football Governance Bill and the Employment Rights Bill will mean that every stadium in the country will effectively become as silent as a church during prayer. At Arsenal, when the opposing fans scream out, "Is this a library? Is this a library?" The Arsenal fans will be able to point to Sir Keir in the royal box and go, "Yes, it is, thanks to him." Shh. Anyway, so that's my rant against the Employment Rights Bill. But this is going to be a double whammy. It's going to have a devastating effect on the hospitality sector, as though it's not facing, enough compliance costs. It's another another bunch of red tape that pubs will have to comply with. It's going to be devastating, but it's also going to be terrible for the atmosphere at football grounds. Linzi, why is it, you think? I mean, how did Newcastle decide that it was going to promote trans inclusion, and that someone like you should be excluded lest you say something that's likely to upset, a trans employee or a trans fan? Where did that come from? How did that end up capturing Newcastle United? Do you have any theories about that, particularly in light of the fact that it was bought by the Saudis, where, trans people presumably don't get, a great shout?
I don't think they really want to talk about trans people in Saudi, if I'm honest with you. But the only thing I can really think of, I think it works the same way in everywhere this has etched itself, is it just takes one or two activists to get into a certain position within the business, within the organisation, whatever, and then they start peddling what they're saying, and they can misrepresent the law. So you've got the likes of Stonewall, who have spent so many years misrepresenting the law. Then you've got these activists going in feeling emboldened by the fact that Stonewall had misrepresented the law. And then everybody else around just kind of goes along with it because, God forbid, you're called a bigot, or you're referred to as a racist. I mean, I've had all the names, if I'm honest with you. I thrive on them now. But, it's one of them situations where it just takes one or two bad apples, and then before you know it, the rot is just everywhere. And even people who know in themselves that what they're doing is nonsense, they'll still go with the tide because everybody's had it drilled into them for so long that, no, this is the way it is, and it's almost like the brainwashing effect to a degree. It's so bizarre to see. Like, you feel like you're living in an upside down world, don't you? It's crazy.
Don't you think? I mean, I don't know. In many ways, for me, with Newcastle, it's precisely because it's owned by the Saudis that they've become overzealous in their EDI stuff, because it's like, don't look over there, look over, what I mean? I know that we're owned by the Saudis, but we are going to be the most diligent in our inclusion, equity and diversity policies. There's that side. But the other thing that's really peculiar in this is that we're actually witnessing it, as we speak, the rise of women's football, right? And the lionesses are, are considered to be the great heroines. And there's more and more emphasis on women's football. Now, it's interesting because in the women's governance bill, they've decided to exclude women's football from this because they're going to have a different report on that. But there's lots of amendments being put in by other Labour backbenchers and Lib Dems and kind of like, saying we should make the regulator force every single team in the country to make sure that they have a compulsory women's training sessions and all, because this is like one of those bills that's going to add on. And I tried to use the opportunity to say, well, that's very interesting that everybody's very keen on women's football. But the thing that's really amazing about being keen on women's football is at the same time we've got the FA doing things like, and that's how I was able to talk about the case of our brave young heroine and our own lioness in the audience, who is, enthusiastically going out and playing women's football, only to discover that women's football's like been so inclusive, right, that it's basically got men in it, right? But then if you try and say, aren't you a man, and so on, and there's another case that's just hit the newspapers that the FA have just dealt equally intemperately and illiberally with, they say it's our trans inclusion policy. What I'm trying to say is it's absolute double standards everywhere you look, right? Because actually, for all inclusive equity, equality talk, actually, they're betraying women's football. Now, I don't want to make a big fuss about women's football. I'm like, it's just that if you're going to go on about women's football and say this is what the FA say, women's football is so important. It's what every time anyone stands up, now as the Lord's taught in the football governance, in order to give themselves a pass to be opposed to the regulators, say, I support women's football. It's like a way of saying, I'm a good person, I'm and so on and so forth. And then on the other hand, they throw women to the wolves because they won't defend women's football as a separate sex in terms of separate sporting experience. They won't do it because they've already bought into the EDI thing. So it's the double standards drives me mad as much as anything else, and the double talk and the way they try and gaslight you if you call it out, right?
Circular reasoning.
Yeah, you're the bigot,
Right.
when in fact they're the ones who are actually ensuring that women suffer in terms of sport.
Was that your experience, both as a player and as a manager, Joey, that there were certain points of view, certain positions on a cluster of issues that you were expected to take, and if you didn't, and if you were public about dissenting from those orthodoxies, you could get into a world of trouble. And often you did get into trouble for dissenting from those orthodoxies. Why did you? I mean, first of all, is that broadly accurate? Is it like a kind of almost like, is being in football a bit like being in 17th century Salem, where you have to parrot particular views or you end up in a world of pain? And why didn't you go along with it? What prompted you to actually dissent, and why is there such a small minority of footballers who actually do dissent and speak out? More so, actually, in the most recent Rainbow Laces campaign, but still, they were pretty unusual.
I just think where you grow up, isn't it? Your kind of family, came from kind of working class family and had a strong matriarch and my grandmother who, you shouldn't have to give you a look, and that was enough. All big towering, strapping lads. But if my grandmother looked at you, for you're doing something wrong, it was the biggest fear that ever got put through you. And she always emphasised with us about, your principles that you carry on your life journey. And she did a lot of waiting on, and I think she got to the point where she waited on the Queen, and she'd come back and say about how the Queen would crumb up and stuff like that. And then she'd tell you about all the people in between, obviously the Queen and some of the people who obviously thought they were the big I am and the way they behaved and stuff like that. And it always stuck with me. So, you grow up, born in 1982, 89, Hillsborough. 2 people in our road died at Hillsborough. And then to see the smear campaign, what happened to those families. And for me, it was kind of really. I was always outspoken, in dressing rooms and stuff like that. But really, footballers, you don't really have a political agenda so much when you're making your way in the game. But as I got a bit older, obviously, I started to become a little bit more online for political discussion and having conversations, because I think it's very important. As I say, I'd seen kind of big influential people from this area, obviously Morrissey and John Lennon, etc. You grow up with that kind of. You've got to speak truth to power, especially if you see stuff that's happening that's wrong, as difficult as that can be. And I just went on that journey. I ended up using Twitter to get involved with the Hillsborough Justice families, and we got that first e-petition, over 100,000 signatures, which ended up with the families getting the victims of the tragedies' names read out in Parliament, which was a huge moment for them. And since then, I think, I don't know, I kind of think I've been targeted since then, because every time I get interviewed off the police on these malicious communications things, they're like, what are you doing with this following? What are you trying to influence? I'm like, as if I'm kind of some kind of Tommy Robinson, agitator. And I'm like, look, I'm just trying to speak common sense here. I think it's really difficult in my industry for someone to be considered an expert who hasn't done something, but I'm being gaslit. It's all, this ex-woman player who's been a phenomenal women's player is telling me what you should do in this situation, or Harry Kane, for instance, what you should do in that situation. I'm like, that's the equivalent of me going on the Formula One and doing and saying, you should have braked a bit harder there or gone a bit faster. And they're like, what have you done? I'm like, well, I've driven on the motorway, I've got up to 90 mile an hour. It's like, yeah, but this is going like 250 mile an hour and the velocity. So, and then also to speak out on kind of the absurdity I've seen, obviously just not only in the UK, but obviously across the pond, about young female athletes having to compete with disillusioned males, or mentally ill males who think that they're women. unfortunately, they have a massive physiological advantage, and it's very, very dangerous, especially when it comes to stuff like boxing. You know, you're thinking, okay, where are they going to go with this? It must be, if my daughter was sports orientated, she's not. She's into dancing, girly stuff. I would be really worried, because if a young lad at 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 clatters into a young 14, 15-year-old girl, that could be life-altering injuries, catastrophic injuries. Why are we going to wait for a young girl to get killed before we say, oh, well, maybe that was a silly idea? You know, in the boxing ring, are we going to see a woman be killed by a transgender fella? You know, what's it going to take? And if you call it out, you're a bigot, you're, you know, homophobe, transphobe, whatever they add on. And I was massively influenced by kind of Christopher Hitchens and his, you know, the way he went about it, although I don't agree with on everything. And I think it's important in society to use your influence in the way that you think is best to, you know, spark public discourse. Well, at least me saying what I said about the women's commentators got everybody talking in, you know, lands up and is he right, is he wrong, should he have said it like that, should he not, he's a dickhead, he's all right, you know, whatever it is. But the key is that you start, you know, we're able to discuss and debate and disagree. You know, this now, if you don't agree with people, they're just going, they're siphoning everybody off. You know, you read any of the Solzhenitsyn stuff and Jordan Peterson or whatever, and you end up with kind of, when are we going to open gulags for dissenting people? You know, we're policing tweets now. I've had HCID knock on my door in recent weeks to kind of pressurise me to go and give interviews for tweets, which were a joke. You know, because they caused alarm and distress. I'm like, it was, you follow me. Oh, I don't follow you. Like, I just say what I think. What's that, sorry?
Oh, hold on. We'll have questions in a minute, sir. Claire, you wanted to say one more thing?
I wanted to say, I think that you were talking shite, and I didn't agree with you. But I completely do agree with you in the spirit of, we should be able to say that, right? You should say what you think. I could say, what gobshite, right? And we'll all cope, right? It's not going to be the end of the world. The bit I wanted to raise, which is really tricky.
Mike, speaking of the mic.
Oh, the thing that I wanted to raise that's really tricky is when you were talking about the work you've done on Hillsborough. You know, Hillsborough, probably for a lot of us, was a very important turning point in the way I understood the police, the state, the cover-up, all that sort of stuff, right? However, recently I found myself defending what's known as tragedy chanting, which often takes the form of people taking the piss out of Hillsborough families and Hillsborough victims. And I've done that in the name of free speech, right? And I'm sort of thinking, oh, this is weird, isn't it? Because Hillsborough has become a great example of football fans going, we're going to screw over you, you know, scouts and all the rest of it, right? And it's vile, utterly vile what they say, but I'm a free speecher.
You haven't been to Galatasaray or Istanbul? Like,
yeah, no, I know, but that's what I'm saying. So it's interesting because they've brought in this new public order law. And now, when you say, well, I'm glad to hear you say that, but I'm glad that you agree. But what is remarkable is even people I know who are free speechers are saying, well, yeah, but I wouldn't go so far as to defend tragedy chanting.
Look, unfortunately, if we're going to have free speech, it has to be that. You can't pick and choose what words you're going to get offended by. Like, I'm... As I say, I've lived life in the public spotlight, ups, downs and everything in between. And obviously when you're playing football stadiums and 50, 60,000 people who've usually had a few sozzles, you know, things get said to you that unfortunately are designed to hurt. You know, you've seen in games on the continent. I was lucky enough to play for Olympique Marseille in France. You know, very, very volatile. No away fans for fear of people being stabbed in the stadium. This is in 2015. You know, it was the European capital of culture. You know, you go to Italy. You've seen Lambrettas set on fire in the San Siro and thrown off the top tier. You speak to those lads who've played in the countries. The ultras will take over the training ground, chain the car park gates, and beat the living shite out of players in the changing room on the training ground if they're not performing for the team on a Saturday. So we're relatively moderate here compared to other countries. Like, we really, really are. And I think we have to be careful that I grew up in Liverpool way before I understood football. St John's Estate, Knowsley's the second highest unemployment rate, I think, in the country. The only borough in the northwest with no sixth form provision. So you have to leave the borough to get, after you've left school, to go and further education. Massive Labour heartland, but again, taken for granted, as Labour has in lots of its places, and not had the development it should have got for its kids. So one way out is football. Obviously, another way out's usually the narcotics industry, which is, a lot of the decisions that these kids have, because they want to have nice cars and they want to have nice things, and not everybody's good at school. So we have to create, I think, a society where people can say whatever they need to say. Like you come from a completely different end of the scale to me. You sit in the House of Lords or whatever, and the political spectrum.
I did go to school with Ian Rush. I'd just like to point out.
But so
people are rather surprised I'm in the House of Lords rather than.
But when it comes to football is a very, very working class game, and you spoke about it before really well. It's the modern day Colosseum. Now, politically, it's the biggest sport. I've just come up from watching England against Ireland in the Rugby Six Nations starts today. If this was England in a World Cup match or a European Championship, no one would be in this room tonight. Rugby just doesn't have that gravitas with the people. Where we've gone with the media now and the politicians and the point scoring, the grooming gang stuff, and I just go, what kind of society are we building? If we are not allowed to speak truth to power, and we're not allowed to say stuff that we're not, always going to agree on, because we see the world completely differently. And I'm just going to isolate and build a wall here, and you build a wall here. Where's that going to lead us as a society? Because that's where we're heading. Politicians now, for me, are so, they'll take think tanks to get the feel of what's happening on the people, instead of going and fucking speaking to the people. Go and speak to the people. What's going on in our country? And if you speak about it, the mainstream kind of media attack you, or they just attack the messenger, never the message. So we've just got to keep speaking out, and they'll shut people down incrementally. But if there's enough together, it's kind of I am Spartacus, isn't it?
Okay. So let's go to questions. Jan here has a microphone. Put your hand up if you'd like to speak. Yeah.
Thanks. I hope people will forgive me for taking just a moment before we talk about football to say thank you to the FSU for their help in opposing the introduction of diversity, equity, inclusion into our professional code in the actuarial profession. Really pleased for all your help on that, so thank you.
Thank you. This was, so what was it? The Society...
Institute and Faculty of
Institute
Actuaries.
and Faculty of Actuaries had a consultation about introducing a duty on the part of all their members to promote equity, diversity and inclusion. And we pushed back hard at the Free Speech Union. We submitted something to the consultation, counselled them against it, said that it was likely to lead to people losing their livelihoods, lots of vexatious complaints and so forth. And rather miraculously, a couple of days ago, they announced that they're not going to do it. So that was great. Who else would like to ask? Oh, did you? No, you have follow up with a question. Sorry,
that was a very minor point. My football point is really on tragedy chanting. So I'm very familiar with tragedy as a Manchester United fan. I think we're all probably going to declare our loyalties, aren't we, tonight? So, on the 6th of February, I'll be at Manchester United's ground singing The Flowers of Manchester, laying wreaths. And on the nearest home game, I'll be sobbing my heart out for a minute when we have a minute's silence on the Munich air disaster. But when Liverpool fans do their taking the piss out of Munich, their aeroplane arms, I'm not traumatised. I just think Liverpool fans are knobheads. Sorry, I know I've lost some people in the audience now, but I don't want them to be arrested. I speak as somebody who will still never buy the Sun, in solidarity with my football fan compatriots at Liverpool. But I think we've got to be really careful about the idea that people can police our speech on the terraces and turning football stadiums into outdoor prisons where our every movie is watched is a really problematic thing to do. So, we need to be really... we need to be taking a real stand against that. Finally, just to say, Claire, I kind of disagreed with you slightly because I think there's a real difference between top-down and bottom-up. So top-down, players taking the knee, is very different to bottom-up, crowds chanting for Emily.
Yeah. Just
That's
to say,
what I agree.
on the tragedy chanting point, I agree with you, obviously. We had a case at the Free Speech Union of a young Brentford fan. Brentford were playing Liverpool, and he was only 22. He is only 22, and he joined in a chant that the Brentford fans were chanting about the Liverpool fans, which is always the victim, never your fault. And he didn't know that was a reference, or supposed to be a reference to a tragedy. He just thought that was a kind of caricature of Scousers, and he was arrested and charged with tragedy chanting. I mean, absolutely extraordinary. Do we have some questions? Let's take batches, so 2 or 3 before we start answering them.
A quick statement and a brief question. Very often you see these kick it out campaigns, kick racism out of football, etc. Very admirable until you get to a point in some of those clubs and some of those areas where they've got racist grooming gangs, in which case at that point it seems to be very silent. Clubs don't say out, players, local institutions don't say out. So that's the statement. The question is to do with, if you remember Gareth Southgate, when he were advising his players to get up there and campaign for justice and activism, and every other week there'd be flags lighting up after a tragedy, with the Ukraine war or the Bataclan, and not, like I said, nobody's sympathetic to any of that. But suddenly last October, when there was the Israel massacre, all that clammed up. I think when Gareth Southgate asked why, he couldn't say anything. Ditto the same for the Qatar World Cup. Well, why aren't you saying things about these dictatorships? I think one of the answers was, we're selling Mercedes over there. So it's very interesting what... I can remember Mesut Ozil, the Arsenal player, protesting for the Uyghurs, or Robbie Fowler for the Dockers. They were all punished or, kept silent. Why is there such inconsistencies in terms of the politics of the campaign? And a very final point, does anybody remember Heysel?
So another question. There's a... Yep.
Sorry, a question not entirely directed on football, but the election of Donald Trump and his repudiation of everything woke and that biological sex is a fact. Do you see how quickly do you see that having a real influence in how British politics moves against the kind of woke agenda?
Okay. And should we have one more? Yep.
I don't quite know how to phrase this really, but with the EDI that you were talking about before, where would you see the logic of that ending up? Because to me, if you've got a football team, well, where's the equity there? Because they should be saying, well, we need that to be 50% women, or, it's not then about the skills of the players. And if that works for the team, why does that not work elsewhere?
Yeah. Okay. Linzi, I'll throw one of those questions to you. You're about to issue proceedings against the Football Association for aggressively promoting rainbow laces, even though the FA effectively bans the promotion of what it considers to be contentious political views. So another example is Pep Guardiola got into trouble for supporting the Basque separatist movement, I think. He was told, no, we don't like to bring politics into football. There's an FA ban on wearing badges or shirts or promoting political causes. It's divisive, has no place in the modern game, etc. And yet they're promoting things like LGBTQ inclusion, which seems, at least to some of us, quite politically contentious. Do you think the solution...
Black Lives Matter as well.
And of
Everyone
course,
was kneeling.
BLM, I mean, even on Sky Sports, they had the logo in the corner of the screen, and players are still kneeling to this day. Do you think the solution is to just put a blanket ban or just to allow a free-for-all?
No, I think we just need to nip it in the bud entirely, to be honest with you. We don't go to sports to be posturised to by footballers and commentators and referees and whoever else it is. We go to football because that's where we go as the working class to enjoy ourselves and forget everything. That's why I would go. I would go every weekend. I would work my whole week with my mum, 6 days a week in my business. I would go to St James's Park. I would get as drunk as I possibly could. I would sing and I would shout until my voice had given out, and then I would stumble out of the stadium and fall into a pub outside until I went home. You know, that is what we do it for. We do it for the enjoyment, the passion. We don't go there to be lectured. So I think the whole thing just needs to be nipped in the bud entirely. Like, there's no need for it.
And that's what they're missing. That's what they're missing, because there's now that much money in the game, and you've got billionaire foreign owners, most of the big clubs now, even second and third tier clubs now. You know, you look at Ryan Reynolds, etc., and Rob McElhenney buying Wrexham, who were in the fifth tier in the conference. You know, making documentaries, producing content. Obviously, it's good for the tax revenue as well. But all they want now is these consumers. They aren't these tourist fans who come in, because a tourist fan will spend 150 quid at the match, whereas your local working person, you know, works hard in the local area and can possibly only spend, you know, 30, 40 quid at the match. They don't want you in. They want the consumer who spends more, because it's just more. Like, I've lived through the start of the Premier League in terms of 92 to what it is now, which I think it's very, very dangerous for the government to go anywhere near. Usually the government fuck everything up, don't they? It's like, what do they run really well? What is it they run well? Like, I wouldn't... And, you know, you only have to see the video of Keir Starmer punching the boxing thing, or Boris Johnson playing in any of the soccer aids, to realise how detached from the everyday football fan those guys are. Yet, you know, this is now a political windfall, I think, after Chelsea were taken off Abramovich when the war broke out. Obviously, my club, Everton, have obviously been massively impacted by this because of Uzmanov, the former Arsenal director, the Russian oligarch whose money's been obviously sanctioned as well. So we've got now big global political entities owning our big football clubs, because it's the biggest sport on the planet. I don't think there's a bigger sport, is there, than Premier League football, more televised. I played in a game between Everton and Manchester City when we had Sun Jai playing for us at Man City, and Everton had a guy called Li Tai, who's just got 20 years in jail in China, playing, and there was 600 million Chinese people who watched that game. So all of our TV times, all the TV schedule, everything now is geared around maximising profit and the match day experiences as well. You know, the Tunnel Club at Man City, or whatever that nonsense is they're putting in. So you pay 1,200 quid for a ticket to watch people as you're eating your dinner spit on the floor and eat chewing gum and jump up and down before they get ready to go round and kick a bag of air. And for the working class football fan, don't forget, most of the football teams came around pits or working communities where the 3 o'clock kick-off time is designed for people to come out the pit and get to the game, get a shower and get to the game. It's not designed for all these tourist fans who are coming in, you know, and flying in on jets for the weekend like they would for the MLB or the NFL or the NBA or whatever it is in the States. There's just this disconnect with the people who own the game, whose game it is, which is the people who've built these clubs up through generational support, you know, like Linzi and her family, who've gone and watched the team through hell and high water. Now, when everything's going great and we've got great atmospheres in stadiums, we want to now not let the local people back in. I think it's wrong, and the wrong way to go about it is to give some absolute imbeciles in government who have no clue how to run a bath, never mind a football club or a football league. They're only going to ruin it, and it'll end up like Serie A ended up in the early 90s, which was the global Super League where the best players went, and they'll break it, and we'll end up with all the lost tax revenue and all the good stuff that a really well-functioning Premier League and football pyramid in England could bring to not only the local communities but local people. Because we've seen in COVID how important the football club is for local people's mental health. And it's why I want to get women commentators off the men's game, because it's not good for my mental health.
Claire, did you want to respond to some of the questions?
The only thing I'm slightly wary of that, I suppose, Joey, is that's the argument. The arguments your description of the history of football and its relationship with the working class is spot on. But that is exactly why the government, both the Tory government and the Labour government, is saying we need the Football Governance Bill to protect it from all these, greedy billionaires who are coming in, kicking this is
classic socialist movement to get control and more regulation to create money for their cronies, and it takes away from the football clubs.
Yeah, but
just trying to get your fingers in the pot.
No, I know, but
of a big industry that's functioning well.
All I'm saying is they're saying exactly what you were saying, which is that. I'm just pointing out, because it's important, the reason why both this government and the previous one got away with this football governance bill was they said, we're only doing what the fans want. And then they kind of did that description of this being a working class, the pit villages, all that sort of thing. And what I'd say is I don't think it's a problem that the Premier League is successful and makes lots of money, right? And I'm not going to get chippy about rich owners. My thing is a political point, which is, and by the way, I'm very partial to what's happening in Wrexham, because I think that whatever the motivations of owners, the main thing is that has made a huge difference. I'm from North Wales. Yeah. That's made a huge difference, that local area. Because for once, it's not Wrexham whinging about being... It's like, God, at last, right? It's like
that's a thing, Claire, that could be replicated across the country.
I agree.
Like every team.
But what I'm saying is they're saying the Football Governance Bill will replicate it across the country and it'll stop the big greedy... Anyway, I'm just explaining. We just got to be careful about just making sure they don't get away with using our own arguments against us. That's the point I was making. But the other thing I was going to say was that the main thing I want to say is this thing about keeping politics out of football, instinctively I agree with that. And absolutely, Joey, you're so right. Nobody wants to be bloody lectured at the best of times. The last time you want it to happen to you is when you go to the match, right? And that is not what... However, it's also the case that the Scottish government in the past, and this is one of the reasons I got involved in this whole debate about free speech in football, said what we're going to do is ban fans chanting, sectarian chanting, right? And it was the Celtic, and I'm from a Celtic family, right? So, by the way, my Celtic family and Celtic fans have been absolutely disgustingly anti-Semitic and pro-Hamas throughout the whole conflict since the 7th of October. But I still don't want them to be arrested for what they chant on the terraces, right? That's the whole point is, if they even want to chant politically, I have to stick with it, right? So that one of the difficulties that I've got, Hillary slightly misunderstood me. I completely agree with you. There's a real difference between grassroots and what they do, right? But sometimes they do obnoxious things from top down. It's just that I don't care if footballers take the knee. If they do it, it's prickish, right? It's a stupid thing to do, and it's not fighting racism. What I object to is when they say that if you don't respect them taking the knee, you're a racist, xenophobe who agrees with the murder. And so all I'm saying is, if you want to have woke politics on the terraces, feel free. If you want it on the pitch, feel free. But if you also want to go, what you are for doing that, oh, God. I've just realised it's been filmed and I've sworn throughout. I'd just like to remind you...
We can bleep it out.
I'm actually gobsmacked. I haven't sworn.
I'm just like to point out that I am a baroness. and I'm ever so sophisticated, and I didn't just say that. But anyway, the point I'm making is that I don't want official political lecturing from the people who own clubs, work for clubs, or the government interfering in clubs, telling them got to do it. But I also don't want to ban any mention of politics anywhere near a ground, because I just don't think that's what it's like, because I just think politics is back. And your point, exactly right, which is a lot of fans at the moment, when they get together and go in the pitch, are talking about the grooming gangs, they're talking about Southport. And why shouldn't they? Because they're fed up of being lectured about that when they know there's things happening in their town that everyone's turning a blind eye to.
But that's what COVID, like, if you understand the fabric of a football club. I grew up, my dad played amateur, so he worked, and obviously trained Tuesday, Thursday, and played the kind of Northern Premier League. So I've travelled all around, the northwest of England and Northern England, Blythe Spartans, Bridlington, all over. And you see what these football clubs are in the community. What happened with COVID? Everybody was, kind of taking fans for granted, and then we had no fans in the stadium, and we realised, oh my God, there's no atmosphere. Level of performance dips because, the energy, the adrenaline, all the stuff, all the mad chemicals are released to get an unbelievable performance. The bigger the occasion, the more fans that are there, the more that's on the line. And what I also saw was how much it was imperative in many regards for people's mental health to work, as Lindsay said, work 6 days a week, grafting to make better in your life, and then just to go and lose your marbles when a team scores on the stadium, or talk about stuff that you might want to talk about in front of your mum or dad, or you meet people in the football community, you have a few beers or whatever, and you put the world to rights. In the midst of that, it's one of the few sports where, like, I come from a quite different background to many years, but men kind of don't cry where I'm from, or you're a homosexual. So that's the kind of tough background that you kind of grow up in inner city Liverpool. And then, you go to a football stadium, someone scores a goal, you're hugging all complete strangers, kissing them on the head. Football does that to you. Rock concerts, you don't really get, there's not many other sports. Cricket, you very rarely see the outpouring of emotion like you do in a football stadium, especially in big moments. And, I grew up, as I say, Italia 91st World Cup, and then those first wars for me, kind of Iraq and Yugoslavia. And then if you love football, you go back and study, because Yugoslavia had great sides, really good, won the youth Olympics, had a great generation of players come through who all ended up playing for either Croatia, Serbia, Montenegro, whatever, Slovenia, because of the war. And when you delve into that and you read it, the war started in the football stadiums, because it was the only place where you could have political discourse through all the nonsense and the craziness that was going on in their country, to suppress people's ideology and to suppress free speech. And this is what they will do. Unfortunately, because they don't understand what the proletariat uses its Colosseum, its entertainment for. So they want it because it's making a lot of money. They want to get in there and regulate it and get, and they'll end up ruining it. It's a free market, capitalist game where it's a true meritocracy football. The best person gets in the team. If you're scoring the goals, you get in the team and you get paid an astonishing amount to do it. If you don't, then unfortunately some people are going to say really nasty things to you. Like, I think the Kai Havertz situation like that, it does cross a line. But also, when you live and you get paid what we get paid, and you know what you're signing yourself up for, like being a boxer, you sign yourself up to get punched in the face. To play in the Premier League, you sign yourself up to get verbally abused in away stadiums. Trust me, the bank account at the end of the month softens the abuse. And after the period, for me, I'm quite thick-skinned, as you could imagine. For me, I quickly realised that offence is something you take. So you can call me whatever you want to call me, say whatever you want to say. I have to accept it at a level to be offended by it. So pretty much after about a couple of thousand times getting really offended, you quickly realise that, who attaches the offence? Like, who's the offence police who says you can't say that? This is a never-ending game now. Thankfully, America are waking up to it. But we shouldn't be hiding people based on the skin pigmentation or the sexual orientation. It should be because they're the best candidate for the job. I think if we try and police speech in any regard, I think it's very, very dangerous. Unfortunately, it only works when people you don't like say things you don't like.
Yep, offence is taken, not given. And that reminds me, we didn't answer the question about whether we thought that Trump's electoral victory would mean the eventual collapse of the woke church over here as well, just as it seems to be collapsing in America. I think it's a double-edged sword. I think it's quite helpful in some respects, but it also enables the kind of high priests of the woke church to point at Trump and say, see, it's only white supremacists and far-right maniacs like him who oppose these nice things we're trying to do. And that might be, a reason to double down on it rather than start giving up on it. Should we have one more round of questions and then we'll wrap it up? Yeah, there was the lady in purple at the end here who had her hand up before.
Hi, Linz. I'm a sports fan like yourself, but mine's rugby league. It's okay being wheeled out as a mouthpiece and, someone who's going to put themselves forward to stand up against all of this nonsense. But what happens with you behind the scenes in terms of not only have they targeted you, harassed you, compromised your privacy and your safety, and you've been abused online for it, they've taken away something that's the fabric of who you are, and that's the football team that you love and you support and going in, week out. And I don't think people understand how much that does to a person. Yeah. And obviously Newcastle, it's not a fashionable team. So we follow our teams because it's not, you don't go in it because it's fashionable. It's because it's part of you and it's part of family and stuff. So how have you actually coped with the mental well-being of having something that's so important and so intrinsic to who you are taken away, and now having to stand up and be like, yeah, they've took away everything I love, but I'm okay, when actually it's not okay. It's abhorrent what they've done. How do you deal with that?
Before you answer that, let's have a couple more questions.
Hi, 2 questions for Linzi and then kind of an observation to Baroness Fox. Sorry. First question: have you managed to get to St James's Park since this has happened? And you might not want to answer that question. And the second question there is, would you want to go back to St James's Park after the way they've treated you? And then another question, I'm a Man United...
Ever since they banned her, they've suffered a parabolic decline in fortunes. Might be a coincidence, might not be.
By the way, Newcastle are quite a popular team at the moment. Yeah. I'm a Man United fan, a Man United season ticket holder. Is there any advice you can give me how I can get banned for 2 seasons? And then just finally an observation for Baroness Fox. I think, maybe you can counter this, I don't think this is about regulation or money. I think the governments, Conservatives and Labour, despise working English people, and this football is a last bastion for English working people, and they just want to destroy it. That's what I think is happening.
The two of us back in the day used to be police officers working at, local stadiums. Back in the day, 80s, 90s, when, there was a good amount of trouble, you can imagine, we were taught things like definitions of the law so that you knew. You didn't have to go back to the station. You didn't have to look on the computer. You didn't have to ask the boss. You knew if an offence had been committed with regard to, under common law or Section 5 public order or whatever. You knew what that was and what it wasn't. And it seems, I just wonder what the place of the police in this is and the way in which that has been taken over effectively in many ways, such that instead of learning the law and how to apply it now, we have so much emphasis being given on policing thoughts. And, part of it too is, if somebody was being aggressive and racist on whatever else it was, you would deal with that. And you would deal with it, by taking somebody out of the ground or whatever it was. You weren't afraid to do that, in a way, because you felt like you would be backed up by doing so. Whereas these days, etc., to be able to do that, then in the days of social media, etc., you're going to potentially... I'm just saying I wouldn't want to be in the police these days because you can't win either way. So just some sort of thoughts around the way policing has fundamentally changed in a very short space of time, in my opinion.
Joey, I respect you as a footballer, as a human. I was there. I think the last time I spoke to you verbally, mentally, was when you were playing at Man City and we won the title, and it was that Sergio thing and you got sent off. So I've got the greatest respect for you as a Man City player, as a human. And after you finished the game, you've been really outspoken. But I didn't want to come here tonight and mention Tommy Robinson. But when you did, I kind of thought, hang on, that guy mobilised football people to rise up, because the EDL was all about football guys rising up, almost to talk about us, something that we weren't allowed to talk about. And it's only been recently, and certainly myself, I've been empowered. I felt empowered in the last 2-3 weeks with Raja Mayer, Maya Tusi, and various podcasters that have been talking about this grooming gang, Pakistani grooming gang issue, and Tommy Robinson. And today, I spent 4 hours watching Tommy Robinson rally, and all of these people bringing back like Christianic values towards our society. And what I want to put to the FSU is, where do people like me who have ideas like you that are subjugated because whether it be trans, whether it be football, whether it be any ideology, whether it be my personal position, which I've nailed my kind of whole being against the state-sponsored grooming gang mass rape of our most vulnerable people. And I kind of have this thing in my brain whereby if we can't protect the children, and if 15 years ago football guys were going out and defending Lee Rigby and people like that, and we were slapped down, where does society go? Where do we actually go morally from this juncture? And it's really, I feel it's almost civilizational. It goes beyond, and I commend your work in terms of speaking out and, you know, calling out the likes of Gary Neville, who I saw in Davos strolling down the street, and he didn't want to have a conversation, yet he talks shit about Labour all the time. I'm absolutely, I nearly had a mental breakdown because I've been gaslit and I've been silenced. And you know what? Right now, I don't actually give a fuck about anybody shutting me up, because I'm beyond that. And I'd like to hear the panel and everybody else tell everybody in my position, which is just a layman, how we are supposed to navigate through this and still remain with a job. How do I keep my job where I work for a professional company that's saying I can't have these opinions because our company values don't support these opinions? I mean, I'm in bits. What can I do as a person when I can see the absolute moral fabric of the country going to the dogs? And it's not political. It's not about migrants. It's not about this. It's just about right, wrong, justice. And that's it. And I'm sorry to ramble, but I think we need to go there.
Okay, that gentleman behind you, Jen, we just time for one more, and then...
All I'd like to say is that free speech seems to be under attack from both the from political, religious, cultural, you name it, there's an angle to attack free speech. It seems to me, feels to me that there's some coordination, but I don't know. But I'd like to know, is there an enemy of free speech? Who is the enemy of free speech? And how do we fight the enemy of free speech?
Okay, well, Linzi, two of those questions were addressed to you. Have you tried to go back to St James's Park since the ban? You don't have to answer that. How has your mistreatment at the hands of NUFC and the Premier League, how's that affected you personally behind the scenes? How traumatic have you found it?
It's not been nice. I think I've spoken about this a few times with people. While I do still, I'll sit and I'll watch my team. I support my team. I'd be lying if I didn't say that something had been broken. in it all. You know, I'll literally get emotional now when I talk about it. That's how upset I get. And I don't quite know what it is yet because I'm still going through it. So I don't think until it's, oh, see, I told you, emotional lesbian. But until I'm at the end of it, I don't think I'll really be able to figure out quite how broken I am through it, to be honest. So, no, I haven't been back, but I did go watch us beat the Mackhams in the home end at the stadium. I like that was quite fun. Sat on my hands the whole 90 minutes, not gonna lie. It was very hard. Yeah.
I can respond to a little bit of what you said. You said, what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to defend ourselves if we get into trouble for speaking out, for speaking our minds? One thing that's really the last 12 months have brought home to me is that we got involved in defending lots of people who got into trouble for saying things about the Southport attacker and the social disorder that followed. And most of those people we haven't been able to help, at least not as much as we'd like, because when they were arrested and charged and remanded, they pleaded guilty. They pleaded guilty partly because they often didn't have very good legal advice. They were advised by duty solicitors. They pleaded guilty because the law isn't as clear as it should be when it comes to free speech. There are so many fetters on our free speech now, legal fetters, and so many different standards are applied. It's such a complicated area of law. Often bits of the law contradict each other. So a lot of people just thought, I want to get this over with. I think they came under pressure to plead guilty. They were led to believe that they'd be banged up on remand before their case came to trial for a long time. Better to get it over with, get a 25% reduction in the sentence if they plead guilty and so forth. But it proved very difficult to help the people who pleaded guilty. And that was one of the fantastic things, actually, about the case of the young 17-year-old girl in the audience tonight when the FA charged her with misconduct. I think they expected her to just accept the charge, accept the sanction, but she didn't. She fought back. She pleaded not guilty, and that's what's enabled us to help her in a way we wouldn't have been able to do had she pleaded guilty. And incredibly brave, the right thing to do. But my advice, if you ever do find your collar being felt as a result of something you've said on social media or in the workplace, however much pressure you come under, seek proper legal advice before making a plea, before entering a plea. And if you join the Free Speech Union and you get into trouble for something like that, we have a number you can call, which will put you through to a criminal solicitor who can advise you on what the best thing to do is. And one guy, I'm pleased to say, who was arrested for supposedly stirring up racial hatred because of a video he posted on Facebook in the immediate aftermath of the Southport attack. He was arrested, charged with stirring up racial hatred, pleaded not guilty, a guy called J. Michaels, and his trial is taking place in Merthyr Tydfil Crown Court on Monday. And we've paid for his solicitor, we've paid for his barrister. It's a jury trial, and we very much hope that at the conclusion of that trial, he'll be found not guilty. But he has a shot anyway, and we'll see what happens, and we'll find out pretty quickly because it'll probably be a 3-day trial. But that's my advice. If you do get into trouble, if you find yourself being dragged down to a police station, interviewed under caution, charged with a speech offence, don't rush to plead guilty. Take proper legal advice before pleading. And the people who did plead guilty, I think many of them now regret it. And we're trying to help them in some cases, but it's proving difficult. So Claire, did you want to respond to any of those questions?
The idea that I want to explain that I do believe that the Football Governance Bill is going to go through because there's a contemptuous attitude to football fans. I agree with that, but I don't think that's what's driving it. And the thing I wanted to just warn you about and to keep your eye out for is that the way it's posed and to a certain extent espoused by the people, and they mean it, is they want to smash up the Premier League on behalf of the fans. And the fans of smaller clubs and non-Premier League clubs. And the reason I'm saying that is because what drives people is often politicians think they're doing the right thing. And they do actually think they're doing the right thing. That's what gives it that sanctimonious virtuousness, right? So they think they are behaving in a moral way on behalf of millions of fans against greedy Premier League, over rich, super rich, and all the rest of it, right? That's what they react against. And what gives them a moral authority. And I'm saying don't be fooled by that. And therefore I end up defending the Premier League, which is weird. You know what I mean? Like you just end up defending, I end up defending the dodgy owners and all the rest of it in order to say it's got nothing to do with you but out. So that's just to make that point. I think that politicians hide behind the fans or the working classes all the time. They're doing it on our behalf in order to protect us, if that's the way they pose it. And I'm just saying, be sceptical when you hear that. I suppose to finish, I was interested in the evidence put forward by the police officers or the former police officers. I think that it's really difficult to be a police officer in the UK because we are going through a period in which social norms are collapsing in many ways. Authority is now generally disregarded. Many young people, don't take any notice of you. Adult authority is compromised. There's a really unpleasant antisocial atmosphere around, I think we're all aware of. It's a bit scary, right? For young people, they literally are at risk of death because there's like knife crime is at rampage. It's not just London, right? We've already talked about the grooming gangs, but it's a lot. There's just that sort of feeling, isn't there? Just where you just think, bloody hell, it's going. Anyway, if you're a police officer, you're meant to police that. And to be honest with you, they're not doing very well, not doing a very good job. Far easier to be a police officer who scours through Joey Barton's social media output. Do you know what I mean? A bit safer. And you actually can get a few hits because you can then say, oh, we've actually solved the problem of hate crime in this country because we've gone round and visited Joey, right? Or whatever it is. But that is, and I'm afraid it's an act of cowardice on behalf of the police force that they are avoiding the real police. I'd never be a police officer, but I'm just saying if you're going to be one, go out and do some bloody policing, right? Because there are crimes and criminals you have to confront. Stop making up criminals. But there is another problem, which is that if then the police are then going to go around policing speech in the way that they are doing, then the problem is that they don't know any more than anyone else what hate is. What's a hate speech? I mean, it's entirely subjective. It's entirely in the eye of the beholder, as it were. And we can live with, and that's one of the things, which is why they then can be overzealous, because they can say, I've interpreted that as hate. And somebody else will say, oh, don't be so, that's not, why have you turned up at the door for that? That was just an opinion. And in a way, it's an impossible job for them because they're not real crimes. They're and it's like offence or it's like harm of speech. Trump vibes to finish, because this is a bit more optimistic. I don't mean because of Trump. It is remarkable. I'm not a fan of Donald Trump. But when I heard his speech, when he did his inauguration, I thought, God, I don't like Trump. I think he's a narcissistic guy. He's a superficial guy with no intellect's ever read a book. Drives me mad. He did his inauguration speech and I was cheering, right? Every time he brings out an executive order, I'm like going, yes, yes. I mean, obviously a lot of it's on EDI and gender and things like that. But I do think, oh my God, I'm overexcited. Anyway, it is the case that the Trump vibes is something that we can all take some enthusiastic encouragement from, and I hope that it ripples over here. The downside of this is that people get complacent. The first thing is that everybody thinks you become a Trump supporter if you say what I've just said. And as you say, I know next time I say the words EDI in the football governance bill report stage, the government ministers are all going to roll their eyes, right? And then they're going to say, we don't want this Trumpist, simplistic attitude here based on bigotry. And it'll be very annoying. The downside from our point of view as free speech is, I think, is that people get complacent and think, oh, well, all we have to do is like have the Trump vibe. People actually think that we've won. Not a chance. And by the way, free speech in America haven't won, right? There's a huge amount of pain to go through. If you think you can win free speech, so just having elected a president who says a few things and abolishes EDI, no chance. We've got to work much, much harder. So I think the biggest problem that we face at the moment is complacency about our own side, who, to be honest with you, sometimes can go, I support free speech, but not for you, woke lot. I'm going to try and get you sacked and all that. We've got double standards. We've got to be consistent. We've got to get better at our arguments. And we've got loads and loads of young people to convince because they're not actually on our side yet. And they're the ones we need to win over. And it's not their fault that they're not won over. It's our fault for not having good enough arguments to win them over. So we've got a big job to do out there.
So, the last question, Jerry, I'm going to throw to you, which is, where is the attack on free speech coming from? I'll just throw in my 10 cents worth, which is, maybe that's the wrong way to look at it. Maybe there's a kind of natural entropy when it comes to free speech. As human beings, our default position is to shut down points of view that we find deeply offensive or upsetting, points of view which trample on things we find sacred. Our natural impulse is to shut those points of view down, to attack the people saying those things that we find really upsetting and unsettling. That's the natural human impulse that has characterized most human society until very, very recently. Free speech is not a natural thing for human beings. To tolerate somebody saying something really offensive and upsetting is difficult. It takes work. And without institutions, without the police, without laws defending free speech, it just naturally begins to wither and die. And that's what we seem to be witnessing at the moment, in the absence of a robust cadre of people willing to stand up with institutions, organizations like the BBC, the New York Times, Whitehall, senior politicians being prepared to defend free speech and remind people why it's important. It just naturally begins to wither and die. I mean, that's my view, but what do you think, Joey?
Yeah, look, it's difficult to know where it comes from. I think it comes from a kind of general acceptance by everybody in some small part, obviously some more than others. When I think about the question some of the guys asked in terms of the government, and I must disagree with Baroness Fox here on the coming in and regulating and taking some kind of position, because if we're all honest, there's 92 professional clubs in the English pyramid. There's probably only 8 of them, really, that the rest of the world are that bothered about, which becomes the Premier League product. Man United, Arsenal, Chelsea, etc., etc. You know, unfortunately, Sunderland fans, no one really cares if Sunderland in the Premier League or not. Yeah, it's a great seasonal option, you know, every now and again.
Even the players don't live there.
You know, but I'm saying that's all they want. And if we're not careful here, don't forget, not long ago we had the almost the mutants of an outbreak of a European Super League, which was what the Premier League was founded to protect against anyway. It's obviously become a behemoth now, the Premier League, and the problem you've got is, I think people want to, you know, governments want to tax it. They want to fiddle away and get away in to get a revenue stream out of it. You know, it's I think, very dangerous to start meddling with what is a really successful product in the Premier League. It's probably one of Britain's best exports, isn't it? Or, you know, in terms of, you know, the job it does to sell, you know, this country to the rest of the world. And
just clarify, that's what I think, and that's why I argue.
All right. So
why, sorry. I just think it's important we understand how they sell what they're doing. That's all I was trying to say.
And that's why I do think it should be, you know, we've got to be trickier in terms of depoliticised. Do you know what I mean? But then, you know, as I said, it's about Yugoslavia, the kind of war and the rebellion starting there. You know, we've got to be really careful in this country, because As I say, our football club's a huge part of the community. So I think there is a conversation to be had to how we make them more sustainable, etc., etc. But I would really worry about anybody who I've seen in the last, let's just say, 25 years of government, successive governments, doing anything to, they're more likely to get it wrong than get it right. And as I say, if they get it wrong, as Serie A found out in the early 90s, that league's no longer the force that it was. So when Erling Haaland's here and he's getting 900 grand a week to play for City, don't forget about 45%, 50% maybe, depending on which government, that tax is going to the local area. So we should want the best players playing here, earning the most money, because that means the fans get the best product, but also, the tax and all the offshoots of the tourism and all the great things that come out of that. When I go back to the police, my experience, and I'll have to say this just because it's a peculiar one. I don't know whether this is the same for everybody, but because I'd made a joke online, it's kind of, ITV put a statement out, Gary Neville got involved. All the people who pray in public, they all virtue signaling, they're all out. And it was a joke, it's like, it's not, it was about Fred and Rose West. It wasn't to be taken serious. And then it ended up being about Pol Pot and Joseph Stalin again. It was just like, it was just getting more absurd, thinking, surely they'll realise this is a joke. And anyway, fast forward 2 or 3 weeks after that, I'm visited on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday by 2 CID officers each day knocking on the door. By the way, when my kids and my wife are in the house, like in the daytime, like 12 o'clock till say 1, 2 o'clock. But obviously I was up and out early. I didn't know they were looking for me for 3 weeks, you know what I mean? And then by the 5th day, they're getting quite aggressive. Obviously, my solicitor then speaks to them to try and arrange, but they keep knocking on the door. I end up going and speaking to them, voluntary interview, obviously no comment. And, I end up getting, I thought it was going to be an NFA, it's like nonsense. Did you mean this when you said this on the tweet? What did this mean? For 2 hours of an interview, the most Stasi-like questions you've ever heard in your life.
I think we'll conclude on that note, but I think there's one valuable lesson we've learned this evening, that if you do get burgled, when you call up the police to report the crime and they sound not terribly interested, you don't get the sense they're going to actually send someone around to investigate. At the conclusion of reporting what's happened, said, and oh yeah, someone spray painted "Justice for Joey Barton" on my kitchen wall. You'll have police helicopters, squad cars outside your house within about 30 seconds, because that's a real thought criminal involved in that burglary. Anyway, I want to say thank you to our panellists this evening. Thanks to all of you for coming tonight. Thanks to Linzi Smith, to Baroness Fox, to Joey Barton, and to our lioness in the audience. Thank you.